So hello, how are you?
Great. How are you doing?
Very good. So I'm just going to start by presenting myself. I'm Gabriel. I'm one of the neonatologists at the Montreal Children's Hospital. And today we have Ode and Marko. Ode and Marko, are you okay? I call you by your first name?
Yeah, it's Ode.
Oh my God, I make always.
Not quite so exotic. No problem.
So I really want to thank you for taking the time for this. The goal is to create a little video for hopefully future parents that might be in a similar situation, and we'll talk about it more, that they're maybe expecting to be admitted eventually to neonatology. And before we dive into that and to learn more about your story and the story of Teo, I just want to, first of all, have your consent that you agree to this interview.
Yes.
And you're okay that we then put this video that will tell a bit of your story and the story of Teo so that other families may be able to actually benefit from getting to know your story and how full of hope and beautiful stories it is.
Yes.
Yes.
Wonderful. Okay, so maybe, let's start with the meat of the subject. Tell us a bit more about your own story. Tell me about Teo, your story since I guess we met, so that people can understand what has been your journey.
So when we were pregnant with Teo, we found out in like the second ultrasound that there was something amiss. And so we found out that his stomach was right beside his heart, and we learned about this thing called congenital diaphragmatic hernia. So we knew nothing about this, relatively rare condition before. And then we obviously did a lot of reading and learned a lot about it. So this was just when we were doing our kind of routine second trimester ultrasound. And originally I was followed up by a midwife, and, I was going to give birth in a birthing center. And, that was kind of the birth plan. But then, yes, we saw that his little stomach was beside his heart. And then we learned that with the congenital diaphragmatic hernia, there's a hole, when things are developing, there's a hole in the diaphragm, which essentially makes it so that the organs that are supposed to be on the bottom come and move their way up to the top. So things like the intestine, the stomach, and in our case, all of the organs, which we found out much later on, that it was a very, very severe congenital diaphragmatic hernia. So yes, but at that point, what we learned was that his stomach had, moved up with his, intestines as well, and that was compressing. That it had essentially pushed his heart all the way to one side, and it was compressing his lungs. So his lungs were, a fraction of the size that they should be. And later when we did follow-up ultrasounds, and they were doing tracing of the lung to see to take measurements and to see how big it was, and when we did an MRI, we found out that the total fetal lung volume was something like 26%. So we learned a lot about these kind of percentages of total fetal lung volume or lung to head ratio, and what that meant for the prognosis. And, through a bunch of research on our end, we found out that, the prognosis for Teo was really bad, because we were having a hard time getting a straight answer of like, okay, so, from the literature, we saw that CDH cases, there was like a 50-50 chance of survival. And then when we saw, our kind of measurements, it looked like he had a 30% chance of survival. And so that's when one of the doctors actually at the Montreal Children's Hospital had actually referred us for a consultation for a feto procedure. So fetoscopic endotracheal occlusion, I believe.
You're good. You know your terms.
Yes, my acronyms. But yeah, so we got referred to the Ontario Fetal Center in Toronto, the wonderful team there. And yeah, we did an amniocentesis to make sure we could rule out all sorts of genetic, maybe anomalies or genetic issues. And we went forward with the fetal procedure. And that was pretty wild too. So that was an in utero procedure where it was in two parts. Essentially what it was is going into the throat into Teo's throat with a camera. So I actually got to watch the whole thing, which was pretty cool. And they went down, and into the trachea, they placed a balloon. And the idea of that balloon is that that would help the lungs grow. And it really did, because he went from having something like 28% of total fetal lung volume to close to 70% of total fetal lung volume once the procedure was all said and done. And there was obviously risks associated with that procedure, like rupture of the membrane and early kind of giving birth early, prematurely. And I think with their kind of with their study and with their numbers and so on, the average the average gestational age that women were going into labor in was something like 35 weeks. And they said at that point, 35 weeks, the CDH babies tend to do as well as the non-CDH babies. So it's not a big deal. But the idea was to really try and keep him in there as long as possible. Mm-hmm. And somehow I think Teo learned that at 35 weeks, he's like, I'm ready, I'm coming out. And Marko can tell the story of how that happened.
Well, sure, yeah. I mean, we were here in the apartment doing a 3-day meditation at home. So being in total silence, not speaking to each other, not even really acknowledging each other's presence for 3 days. And on the third night, we were listening to a discourse, the last discourse of the meditation. And my plan was to propose to Ode after that discourse was finished.
Cute.
And while we were listening to the last 10 minutes of the discourse, Ode turns to me and says, Marko, I think my water broke. And we're like, what? It's crazy. We weren't ready at all. We hadn't packed anything. And so we were frantically looking for all the things we needed. And she had asked me, she's like, do you even know where to go in the hospital? I said, yes, don't worry. I know where the birthing center is. So we packed everything up, got into the car, and went over to the hospital, got to the birthing center, and we were met by a resident there. His name was Patrick, I think, and he took a look at Ode and he said, yes, looks like you are dilated, looks like you have broken your water. 2 centimeters. And the protocol was that since Ode had broken her water and was dilated, that she was to remain in the hospital until she gave birth. And over the next 24 hours, we basically decided that we were going to try to stay in the hospital, until we needed to, and try to keep Teo in there for as long as we could. And so, we got our laptops and we got our clothes, and we thought we were going to, be working from the hospital for the next month. Next month, basically. And but I think Teo had other plans.
Yeah, definitely.
And so
he had his own plan.
Yeah, and it's like, we were really not expecting it. And plus with the whole CDH, learning a lot about things, and we had a CDH binder as well, because we found sometimes it was just, there was so much information and there were so many different teams of people involved. And sometimes there was like un manque de fil conducteur. I don't know how to say fil conducteur in English, but so it was like we really had to kind of be on top of things, and especially there were some things that were very time sensitive, like doing the fetal procedure could only happen within a certain time frame.
Well, determining the conditions of Teo's CDH was very important to understanding whether or not we were going to do the fetal procedure. So that was a very time-sensitive matter.
Yeah.
So by the time you had ruptured your water, you were back already in Montreal, and you were back.
Yeah, exactly.
Luckily.
We had returned from Toronto, we were back in Montreal.
Exactly.
And so just before Teo decides to come out, how did you feel? Like, I think for families out there, I'm sure it's like what you guys are living through. Clearly, you're two parents that are very dedicated, informed. You go search for, what's the information out there. But how did you feel all along that process? Like, what were you living through? Like your emotions, I'll let you kind of tell me on that.
I mean, for us, it's obviously, this was our first kid. And, you know, when we found out that it was a boy, we also found out about the CDH and we're like, yay, it's a boy. But we're like, whoa. So there was a lot of crying and there was a lot of like being very worried at the beginning, you know, because we were obviously so happy to be pregnant and so happy to have this little person come into our lives, but then being worried about everything, you know. And it's like sometimes, you know, knowledge is power and sometimes knowledge is paranoia, because the more you read, you're like, oh, morbidity rates for CDH
Right.
babies
And
based
there's
on
so much out there, right? Like you can just get
yeah,
lost in the translation of the internet.
yeah. And it's like, it's a good thing that we also didn't have all of the information. So like when Teo went through his operation, and there was a whole bunch of stuff that led up to there and a whole bunch of events, and it was, you know, very stressful as well. But you know, the operation went well and everything, and Dr. Puligandla came and saw us himself, and we love Dr. Puligandla, by the way. We
He's
did a bit of
amazing.
stalking. We know he likes wine. He's pretty much, you know, can do no wrong in our books. Yeah. We called the whole team Puligandla. But yeah, and he had told us that, you know, because he was expecting a class C defect, and then it was a class D defect, and he said all of Teo's organs were up in his chest, and he's like, the operation went well. I'm really glad that Dr. Puligandla at that point didn't say that, like, up until that point, no class D defects had survived, because that would have, like, you know, really been hard for us to handle. We were just like, the operation went well. Okay, sure. Now he's got a patch instead of a diaphragm, but no big deal. And, you know, we're like, okay, well, let's cross that bridge when we get there. Let's get worried about the patch, like, you know, later on. Let's just get through this whole healing from the operation and recuperation. So there was a lot of, you know, it was tumultuous and there was a lot of different emotions. But luckily, you know, I think we have to recognize that we have a lot of privilege, you know, in the sense that, well, I feel very fortunate to be living in Canada, to have, you know, an amazing access to healthcare and healthcare professionals. Both Marko and I have jobs that allow us to work from home, and, you know, and they were both very understanding, you know, of the situation. So, you know, I could end my contract early and that was not a problem at all. And, you know, our relationship is very strong and supportive emotionally and on so many levels. So, and we have meditation as like a tool in our toolbox. So in terms of, you know, we could have been devastated and, you know, seen ourselves as victims or seen Teo as victims. And that was never really our approach. We're like, you know, let's try and focus on the moment all the time. And so even when our parents, like in-laws, they're like, we know everything is going to be fine. And we're like, that's not helpful. We're like, don't say shit like that, because we don't know that everything is going to be fine. And based on everything that we're reading, you know, it's like, it's not a sure thing. So let's be happy about pregnancy. Let's love Teo as he is right now in the womb. You know, let's love Teo when he's like born. Let's do everything to fight for this little guy in general. But like, let's like be optimistic, but not at the same time. It's kind of
realistic.
Hard. Yeah, exactly. So
you guys are amazing parents, honestly. Really, like there's so much love, and clearly, right? I think we met when you were actually, you know, when you were pregnant. We met a few times, and very from the get-go, we could see like so much love into, you know, Teo that was upcoming, and yes, the hope, but also, you know, the questions and what to expect. And you know, you were very informed. But I think for families who are still in the unknown, it's good to see that other families are living through kind of similar emotions of the roller coaster of being scared of what's going to be happening, right? And just for people listening, Dr. Puligandla is one of our pediatric surgeon at the Montreal Children's Hospital, and he's one of the world leaders in congenital diaphragmatic hernia, and he's also the director of our multi-disciplinary congenital diaphragmatic hernia clinic, which we'll talk about later. But I just want,
yeah.
I just want to just go back a bit where you mentioned, Dr. Puligandla mentioned, it was a big defect, and big defects are often associated with poor outcomes or more difficult and more challenging outcomes. And I think we're going to see some pictures you shared with me, and I'll put them in the video to see how, the evolution of Teo from birth to the beautiful young man that he is today. But just to show, I think that how much the evolution of medicine, but also the involvement of parents are so important, because yes, obviously the medicine is there to support and help, but we never replace parents. And you guys have a tremendous amount of work, and we have to recognize how much you invested yourself, and that is what makes a huge difference, right, in many of these cases. And so maybe we can talk about a bit your stay in hospital. How did it go? What did you perceive? You guys, you were very much there all the time, so I'm sure you saw a lot of things. And so maybe share a bit of your story and how it went in the NICU, just so people have a sense of what to expect when they do arrive in the NICU.
Of course. Do you want to start?
Sure, yeah. So the NICU was overall a positive experience. I felt that we were pretty well supported while we were there. Our experiences were different because Ode spent the majority of her time during the day there, so from the morning to the evening, and I spent basically the majority of my time in the evenings and overnight. So I would arrive there around between 4 and 6, and I would leave the next day between 8 and 10 a.m. And so I was there during the night, and nights are very different. Nights are much less things are happening during the night. It's just you and one nurse, and there's one doctor that's on call, or that's there present. And so for me, sometimes I felt like I wasn't as well supported, just because there weren't as many people, to call on during the night. And sometimes when things went wrong, or when things didn't go as you wanted them to go throughout the night, it didn't matter. Even though there was less people there, Teo got the care that he needed to get, and things were always done in a very timely manner. And whoever needed to be there to support whatever was going on was there. And I thought that was really good. And the communication that I was able to establish between myself and the team members that were there, was effective. And I felt that I felt that I was a part of the team contributing to the betterment of Teo's condition. So that for me was really important. And I and Ode, we tried to create a environment that was positive and that was happy within the space that Teo was in. So, we tried our best to
decorate
the room so that there would be sort of a personal feel to the space for Teo. And
He's
also
waking up. I'll go grab him.
and also just trying to be super positive with all the people that helped manage Teo's condition. So that was my experience, and overall it was a positive one.
I'm glad to hear that you felt part of the team, because definitely with all our families, that's what we try to at least we try our best to make sure that the parents are very much so involved in providing also their input into how a baby and their child is evolving, and giving us their input about their own opinion on certain aspects of the care, because obviously you're so important and you see him all the time. Oh my God, look how cute
he is. We're talking about you, Pinky.
You are adorable, right? Hello. So how old is Teo now?
So he's nine and a half months, almost 10 months. Yeah.
Wow. Look how adorable. Look at his eyes are so curious and wide open. You speak to him more in English or French?
Both. Like I spend all day with him, you know, while Marko works. So I speak to him in French, but we both speak to him in English.
C'est magnifique ça. Donc on
Ouais.
parle aussi en français, c'est ça qui est génial.
Mhm,
So
exactly.
we were, you know, Marko shared his vision of, you know, him spending a lot of the time in the evenings at night.
Mhm.
And I think mom, Ode, you were more present during the day. So how was your feeling like during the rounds and, you know, all the people and so many, you know, individual healthcare workers being involved in the care?
I mean, I loved it. Like, it's interesting because even when we go back to the hospital, it's not like we get this like, you know, ooh, this feeling of trauma or stress. It's like in an odd way, we feel like we're sort of going back home, and sometimes we go and visit the folks in the NICU, and you know, it's just, it was pretty amazing to be at what I love about NICU, and I don't know if it's like this in all NICUs or if it's just at the Montreal Hospital for Children, but it's like there's definitely a team and multidisciplinary approach, and they involve parents, and so they have rounds every morning, and I was participating in the rounds, and I was always taking notes, and you know, I was asking lots of questions, and they were breaking things down for me, and you know, and sometimes I'd say like, I don't agree with that, like, you know, with the weaning, if I thought it was too aggressive, especially, you know, because we had seen that he had gotten kind of some withdrawal symptoms and so on. So it was really amazing in that sense, and kind of like Marko as well, for the vast majority of the time, like the people, like the doctors, the nutritionists, the pharmacists, the nurses, my goodness, like they were just incredible. Every so often, you know, we would notice that there was like some nurses that just weren't as good as other nurses, and it sounds terrible to say, but you know, when you're there all the time, you can see things, you know, and so it's like there's a nurse like squirting the sucrose in the mouth and the baby's like choking on the sucrose. You're like, okay, well, you know, maybe don't do that.
Maybe we all have our bad and good days. Probably, you know, sometimes, you know, for sure, NICUs, people are often overwhelmed, but you know, parents are obviously the advocates of their child. So they're the one who's going to be the protector. And it's good to voice when there's something that you feel is incorrect with any kind of healthcare professionals, you know, it's super important. But I'm glad overall it was a very positive experience. I'm happy to hear, because I think it's a big scare for parents that we meet prenatally, or even, you know, that are admitted in the immediate moments after their delivery. And so it's such an unknown. And obviously you come into the NICU, there's monitors, beep beeps, big teams, people coming in with scrubs like this. And to hear from you that it's overall a positive experience, I think that's really, really good. And he's adorable.
I've got so much energy. And it's like, it's interesting because Dr. Yusuf, so one of the fellows, you know, it was neat because one thing that she told us as well, because we would ask lots of questions based on the things that we were reading, and she's like, listen, she's like, Teo isn't a statistic. She was saying like, he's beating sort of everything, you know, that we would have imagined. And it's like, even now, you know, we just not very long ago saw the physiotherapist and the occupational therapist, and you know, it's like it's hard not to obsess about the growth charts, you know, and the percentiles, and you're like, oh, he's only on the 15th percentile for weight, but it's like, hell, he's on the 90th percentile for development. So
amazing.
You know, it's, and it kind of like what you were saying, and a lot of the doctors had said this, you know, there was Dr. Haley who said this, so many of the doctors were saying like the presence of the parents is so important. And you know, it was for us, like at the beginning we were like, oh yeah, you know, we'll do this time to this time, and I was like, I'll finish up my contract. And then Teo had like a pulmonary hypertension crisis in his first week, and we're like, okay, no, we have to be here like 100% of the time. And in those moments, it was pretty amazing to see the team just be on. And it's like there was a nurse there as well, I forget her name now, but she was one of the transport nurses. And at one point, like, there was the respiratory therapist who had, you know, they were transporting Teo from one place to another, and she did something with her machine, and so he actually had no oxygen going into his mask, and he like was suffocating. So his saturation levels were just like dropping, and he was turning blue, you know, and the transport nurse saw it right away and just like reacted so quickly and like switched him over to a different oxygen, you know, and like it was addressed very quickly.
Yeah, definitely people work in teams, you know, there's, I mean,
Mhm.
there's things that happen, and that's why as a team, we work so well, right?
Exactly. And
Because
Dr.
everyone
Haley as
complements.
well in those like first few weeks was like incredible, you know, and she was such an advocate for Teo and for what was working well and so on too.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And an amazing success. I don't want to take more like of your time, but I have only 2 or 3 left questions. I wanted to know a bit, you know, you went through feto, you went through, you know, we can say a prolonged hospitalization, like a few weeks into the hospital.
Half month.
Yeah, we were there for 2.5 months, 70
Exactly.
days. Mhm.
And one of the things, you know, that medicine is obviously changing constantly, right? Like every day it's changing. And part of the reason it's because we meet wonderful families like you guys. Part of it is also because we do research and we try to better understand certain things. And I think you guys actually you participated to my research project at least. And I'm not aware if you probably participated to others, but at least to my research project. And just as parents, you know, going through so much already, I don't know, like, how come you decided to say yes to research, and what's your take on how is research maybe changing the way we are actually treating kids like Teo? Like, what's your take on that?
I know.
So, I mean,
How much time do we have to answer this?
I mean, you know, as soon as I found out that Teo had CDH, I tried to find as much information as I could about it. You know, I found the CDH app that's made by Dr. Puligandla.
Once again.
You know, and I was reading journal articles about, you know, everything that had to do with CDH, and the research is such an important role in our understanding of what's causing CDH, how to treat CDH, and how to follow up with CDH babies after they're discharged from the hospital. So to be able to contribute to that wealth of information that already exists, and to think that we might, you know, play a part in furthering that knowledge is, you know, something really special to us. So, you know, we of course jumped at the chance immediately to be a part of that. So, yeah, I mean, and, you know, research is, you know, it's what really, you know, pushes the boundaries of our understanding, and it's what we have to do in order to, you know, make sure that every other baby who has the kinds of problems that Teo has will also have the same chance of survival like him, you know.
And
You know,
yeah, sorry, go for it.
yeah, so we're totally on board with that.
And he's still part of the research, right? He's still part of, he comes to the clinic, we come here, we do the echoes.
Yeah.
So, you know, last time we were actually playing with, because now he's like, you need to entertain him, right? To do the echoes. So it's always a pleasure to see him grow also at the same time.
Yeah. And even when we were in Toronto, because we had to stay there for 6 weeks because, you know, they put the balloon in at 28 weeks and they take it out at, you know, 34, 35 weeks around there. And like even there they're like, okay, well, we're having a conference on like, it was like an international conference on fetal something, and they're like, can we do a live like ultrasound on you for the conference, because it doesn't happen very often that it's like it coincides with when someone's had a feto procedure. So I was like, of course, you know. And for us, we're just like, yeah, if we can participate, if Teo can help, you know, advance kind of medicine, and yeah, kind of like what Marko was saying, so that other babies you know, and it's like, oh my goodness, so many babies in the NICU. It made us like, it opened our eyes, you know, in terms of like medicine and healthcare. And like now we're donating to both the hospitals, the Mount Sinai one and the one here in Montreal, because it's really incredible, you know, and we have such admiration for you and honestly for everybody who is participating in Teo's care.
I have admiration for you guys. I mean, first of all, you know, the love that you have for Teo is incredible. What you went through is a big deal. It's a lot of sacrifice. You have to move your life to another city for a few weeks. Then you had to be in hospital for a few weeks, you know, the roller coasters of the emotion. And yet you were always there. You were always dedicated. You were the mom and dad, things that we cannot replace, decorating the room, making it like, you know, very humane and lively. So really that's admirable. And for me, that's, you know, I admire parents because every time we have parents in the NICU, I think they teach us something all the time. And so I'll finish with one last question. Now that you are in the free world and living the best life, I want to know how's Teo doing, how you guys are doing. Maybe talk a bit like the CDH clinic. I know that Dr. Puligandla is very much involved to try to make it as easy as possible for families with CDH to be on like a one-stop shop and have all the services. So I would love to hear more on that, and then we'll close.
Yeah, I mean, sometimes it seems like you know, our time in NICU and like the hard beginnings of Teo's life, and even like for part of the pregnancy. Oh, sorry. It seems like a distant memory, you know. Like it seems like so far away because he's waving. Hi.
Hey, you. Hello, big boy.
Because you know he's so like, you know, he's so like so many other little babies, you know. And at the beginning, you know, and when we got here, everything seems like a challenge, you know. And obviously feeding was a challenge, and then there's always pressure that, you know, mothers put on themselves. And so, you know, I was like, why am I not exclusively breastfeeding? And everyone's like, hardly any of the babies who go have CDH are exclusively breastfed, you know. And so it was a bit difficult at the beginning, you know, getting into a routine. And it felt like all we were doing was like, it was feeding. It was like bottle, breast, you know, and sleeping. And yeah, it was hard. It was hard at the beginning. But slowly but surely, you know. And he also had a lot of like tension that was and stress that was, you know, left over from his time at the hospital. And so we had seen a couple like, you know, other like osteopath and some alternative therapists and so on. And they gave us some little exercises that we could do for him and some stretches. And honestly, it's like all of that tension is gone. And he's just so like, right now he's just, you know, reaching for this thing. And he's just such an active, happy, curious, you know, vivacious,
amazing,
bombastic, like a little man. Yeah. Yeah. So the real world is nice. Every so often we have worries, you know, but luckily it's nice to have those follow-ups with the CDH clinic, because at one point, you know, we were like, the patch, what does that mean for his development and his exoskeleton, and is it going to be stretched, and is he not going to be able to develop because of that? And they're like, no, you know, there's scar tissue that grows around that. And, you know, even for his increased risk of scoliosis, like they've got spinal surgeons. And it's nice because like I feel like we're always well connected. So even when, you know, we were having issues with his weight gain and with feeds, like we got to work with another Dr. Santana, but who works in the gastrointestinal kind of
amazing.
Yeah, and we had seen her husband, you know, in NICU.
My colleague.
So yeah, the real world is pretty amazing. And then now it's just like living life normally without thinking too much about that, you know? And for me, sometimes I think like, okay, well, what if we decide to do a family trip? I'm like, do we only do family trips in places that have like a CDH clinic, you know, or like have CDH surgeons, you know? And it's like, okay, maybe just like kind of have to change the chip in the head.
Go back to normal living now,
Yeah.
right?
What about you?
No, it's great. I mean, the CDH clinic is very supportive. It's amazing to be able to go there and see all the specialists that are responsible for Teo's care and ask them questions and get their feedback. And, you know, you get to hear from them that he's doing great and that he's developing at a wonderful rate. So it's really, really incredible. I mean, this process could have been a nightmare. It could have been absolutely the worst experience of our lives. But as a matter of fact, I think it's quite the opposite. It's probably one of the best experiences of our lives. And it's brought us closer together, Ode and I. And it's created, you know, this incredible triangle of strength and positivity, you know, and who's at the center of it is Big T.
Yeah.
So it's really, really amazing. It's really amazing. And, you know, it's wonderful to have met all these people along the way who have given us so much courage and who inspired us, you know, in so many different ways in our life. So this is really amazing. And we always speak of it in this kind of way when we speak to other people about it, tell them how positive of an experience it is, because a lot of people think that going through something like this is traumatic and is you know, is very stressing, and it was in certain situations, but for most of the time it was really, really positive, happy, and amazing.
That's great to hear.
You know,
And it's great to hear because you're going to be stuck with us until the age of 18.
I know, we're excited.
Because the CDH clinic will follow you until you know, an adult, and you're also going to see Dr. Paquette, who will monitor the neurodevelopment, which I'm sure she's going to say it's a straight A. Followed by, you know, all the interventional, all the healthcare professional nutrition and Dr. Puligandla. So honestly, I'm very happy because I'm going to get to see Teo grow up. And so that's really, really wonderful. So honestly, you were very generous with your story, with your, you know, everything you had to say with Teo, you know, showing to the world how amazing of a little boy he is. And I'm very hopeful that this video will help certain parents that are going through probably very difficult, challenging moments to actually see the hope and see, you know, some faces that they can relate to. And so I really, really, really want to thank you for that. I think it's going to make maybe the journey of certain people a bit easier to portray themselves. Obviously, the story of everyone is unique. It's unique, but sometimes just to know that other people have went through that before just helps alleviate a bit of that, you know, those worries. So,
and maybe one last thing that I would add is just because we didn't really mention it, but there was a lot of like kind of like solidarity and empathy between the parents, you know, in the NICU as well. And so, you know, I had sort of become friends with some of the parents, you know, who one woman had like twins that were premature and they weren't doing so well. And then there was another premature birth as well. And it's, you know, and even sometimes, you know, you would have a really hard day and you would go to the little family room and you'd be like eating your food, crying, and then you'd see like a little package of like a gift, you know, from previous parents and like little gestures of kindness like that. And it was like, oh, so like moving and heartbreaking in a good way, you know. It was quite something to see. So there was just a lot of, it was incredible because you sometimes you think, okay, the medical field and so on, it's like, it's, I don't know, maybe very technical, maybe lacking empathy and lacking care and so on, but that wasn't the feeling that we had from all across the board. And like the nurses as well, like, you know, they would have their music on their phones, or sometimes they would sing, you know, to Teo, and you could just tell, or sometimes like, you know, I would go for lunch and Teo was crying, and so I came back and he's just like in the arms of one of the nurses, and I'm like, oh, it's just It's amazing. And they love their job, and you can tell that they have a lot of love and care as well. And they're just extremely competent individuals. So it was, yeah.
I think we're blessed.
Pretty
to
amazing.
have, yeah, I think, you know, I'm so blessed personally, I think, to be surrounded by such amazing, inspirational individuals. They're so dedicated, like the nurses, the doctors, respiratory therapists, all, you know, pharmacists, nutritionists, name it, social workers, like the, you know, housekeeping. Everyone is so dedicated at the Montreal Children, and I'm sure it's the truth for every single pediatric centers all across the board, because people are really into this for hopefully the families and the kids, really, to make them grow as good as possible. So I wanted to thank you. I just want to mention that the research project in which you're participating should be coming to an end soon. So hopefully the data will come out and it will help us also better the care of how we treat infants with congenital diaphragmatic hernia. That particular project, it's Grand Defi, Pierre Lavoie, and Just for Kids Foundation who supported that project. So I want to thank them. I will, after the end of this video, share with on this video some of the picture you shared with me, if you're okay with that, because I think they really give a sense of your journey up until now. And I know this journey is going to just go on and on to be even more amazing, full of beautiful stories. And I cannot wait to hear about them. So thank you again so much. I'll send you a copy of this video.
Yeah.
And I guess I'll see you soon at the CDH clinic.
Yes. Yeah. Thanks so much, Dr. Alton.
Thank you.
Take care.
Have a great day.
You too.
Bye.
Bye.